Welcome to Dead Quiet Mysteries, where the silence holds secrets and every whisper could be a clue. I'm glad you're here. Get comfortable, because things are about to get chilling. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from around the world. We love seeing how far these mysteries travel. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. The Edinburgh Express. The 10:15 p.m. express to Edinburgh lurched out of London Euston under a low, rumbling sky. Sherlock Holmes, clad in his customary Inverness cape, and Dr. Watson, in a tweed overcoat, found themselves toasting the chill air through the compartment window. Outside, the station lights blurred into red and gold as the train accelerated northward. Holmes's pipe, threaded between curious lips, emitted a thin plume of smoke that drifted across the brass luggage rack. Watson unfolded the Evening Gazette, but Holmes's gaze was fixed on the carriage corridor, where a single lamp cast long shadows on polished wood panels. Holmes stirred, closing his eyes for a heartbeat, as if committing the scene to memory. "Notice, Watson," he began in his clipped register, "that the conductor's left glove bears an extra stitch at the index finger. It suggests overuse. Perhaps he's been handling sharp-edged parcels." Watson peered down the corridor. Indeed, the man who'd punched their tickets wore a glove, visibly patched at the fingertip. A second glance revealed the conductor's polished brass badge had an unusual smudge near the serial number. "Curious," Watson murmured, "for a routine evening service?" Holmes inclined his head. Routine rarely features blemishes. Their compartment was numbered C12, one of 6 first-class cabins in the coach. The door lock clicked solidly shut, offering privacy, yet permitting inspection of its mechanism. Holmes ran a fingertip along the polished sill, noting a faint abrasion, no wider than a caterpillar's track. "Footwear too large for this coach's narrow gangway," he observed. "Someone has paced these halls in haste." Watson tucked his Gazette aside and approached the door. "Would you care to test it?" Holmes shook out the ash from his pipe. "Later. Let us catalogue what we can here." A gentle rap summoned them back to the interior. The bar car steward, a gaunt fellow in starched apron, offered whiskey or brandy. Watson accepted a glass of scotch for himself and one for Holmes, though Holmes sipped only after first methodically examining the tumbler for fingerprints. He tapped the glass rim 3 times, listening to the ring. "Lead crystal," he announced. "Not the standard issue for this line. It was likely borrowed for a private client." Watson frowned. "Do lines usually borrow crystal goblets?" Holmes smiled faintly. "Only when catering to someone of note." They returned to their seats. Watson cradled his tumbler, eyes roving the carriage. Beyond the frosted glass he discerned passengers in other compartments, a dowager lady fingering coral beads, a prim governess smoothing her skirts, a violin case resting at the foot of a tall man's berth. Holmes charted each silhouette on his mental index. "The coral beads are artificial, painted in Naples," he remarked. "Too glossy for natural coral. That lady wishes to project wealth she does not possess." Watson blinked. Quite the economy on beads and crystal. Holmes inclined a slender finger toward the window. "And thus, Watson, we meet the first 2 suspects in our little drama." At St. Albans, the train paused for a minute's watering. The doors remained locked, but a porter slipped between carriages with a parcel wrapped in brown paper. Holmes noted the porter's driver's cap bore no railway insignia. "Unauthorized porter," he deduced, "likely connected to our conductor's mended glove." Watson's brow furrowed. "Do you think the glove stitch and this phantom porter are linked to foul play?" Holmes tapped his temple. "All clues are linked, Watson. The question is how." Back in C12, Holmes produced a small magnifier. He examined the compartment's upholstery, eyes narrowing on an inconspicuous stain of ochre dust near the window latch. Sandstone, he concluded, from the quarries near Edinburgh Castle. Someone has been handling stone samples. Watson recalled Sir Alistair Kestrel, the geographer, was travelling with rock specimens. He mentioned sending parcels down to London, Watson offered. Holmes's lips curved. Then he would know of the Express's storage car, but why hide such dust in a first-class compartment rather than in the luggage van? As the train climbed into the Chilterns, the guard's whistle shrilled. The wheels changed pitch on a set of points, and the compartment gave a slight lurch. Holmes rose and felt the carriage floor near the washstand. "See here," he said, pointing to a scuff where paint had chipped from a hurried scrape. Watson stooped to examine it. "The width suggests a gentleman's boot, size 8 at least." Holmes smiled thinly. "Yet no such passenger has been introduced. We shall pay particular attention to any man with that footwear." Watson replaced the Gazette with his notebook and settled beside Holmes. The detective's gaze drifted to the compartment's single wash basin. A brass spigot glimmered under the lamp. With his thumbnail, Holmes uncovered a thin thread of crimson silk caught in the crevice. He held it between forefinger and thumb. Crimson silk, expensive, possibly from a cravat or glove, and carefully cut, not torn. Watson whistled low. "A clue dropped, or one planted?" Holmes studied the fabric. "That depends on who had motive to distract us from more significant evidence." They sat in contemplative silence as the train barreled through the midnight countryside. Outside, the lights of Banbury flickered past, then faded into darkness. Within C12, Holmes's pipe glowed bright orange, a beacon of his calm concentration. Watson took a measured sip of whiskey and glanced at his friend. "You seem convinced that something will occur before dawn." Holmes exhaled a cloud of smoke. "The Express has carried many a peaceable traveller, Watson, but a spine-chilling hush often precedes violence." He tapped the silver rim of his glass. "Mark my words, by the time we reach York, this journey will no longer be routine." Above them, the carriage roof creaked, and the rhythmic beat of steel wheels drummed like a funeral march. Holmes closed his eyes for a moment, recalling every detail. Patched glove, unauthorized porter, sandstone dust, crimson thread. Each piece formed a mosaic, incomplete yet suggestive of a darker portrait. He opened his eyes, meeting Watson's gaze steadily. "Rest now, Watson. Tomorrow night we shall unravel this puzzle in earnest." The doctor nodded uncertainly, but sleep would prove elusive after such a foreboding pronouncement. As the Edinburgh Express raced north, both men sensed that the stillness of the hour concealed a deadly secret hidden in plain sight. Chapter 2. The Fatal Coup. When the first pale light of dawn filtered through the frosted carriage window, Sherlock Holmes stirred from a light doze. Dr. Watson lay beside him, still clutching the remains of his whiskey tumbler. The train had slowed, its wheels clattering over uneven rails, and the low murmur of passengers mingled with the metallic clank of maintenance crews at the scheduled stop in York. Holmes rose, draping his Inverness over his shoulders, and stepped cautiously into the corridor. A faint cry, muffled but unmistakable, echoed from the end of the coach. Watson followed promptly, and together they hurried toward the source. At the threshold of compartment C14, the door stood ajar. Inside, Sir Alistair Kestrel's compartment, previously empty, revealed a scene of sudden horror. The eminent geographer lay face down upon the narrow writing desk. His immaculate evening waistcoat stained a dark, spreading bloom. A slender dagger, its blade gleaming dully, protruded from his back. The slanting morning light traced a jagged pattern of rusty rivulets across the polished wood floor. A single porcelain tumbler lay shattered, its contents long since dried, beside a crumpled travel journal. Watson knelt to check for signs of life, confirming with a sober face that Sir Alistair was beyond aid. Holmes, however, remained composed. His eyes swept the scene with deliberate precision. The compartment door's lock showed no sign of forced tampering, its bolt still secure. The window latch, too, was engaged. Holmes knelt by the body and inspected the dagger. The hilt bore no personal crest. Instead, a thin line of ivory inlay formed a crude vine motif. Holmes tapped the blade's tip against the desk to release it gently, then examined the haft under his magnifying lens. "Imported steel," he remarked quietly. "German manufacture at one of the finer benches in Solingen." He noted faint scratches along the pommel and a small chip in the ivory. Someone poor at concealment, or desperate to reuse this implement. He laid the weapon aside carefully on a handkerchief, marking its precise orientation. Holmes stood and turned to the arrangement of objects. Watson pointed to the shattered tumbler. "He must have been writing here, Holmes. Perhaps took a final sip before." Holmes shook his head. "Note the angle of the spill." He stooped to trace the dried outline of whiskey across the floor. The glass was struck from his hand, not dropped. He moved to the corner where a travel satchel rested against the wall. Inside lay geological charts and fragments of sandstone already identified. Holmes extracted a small white fragment of chalk, lightly dusted upon the satchel's strap. "Chalk from a station platform," he said. "Not originally his." An interloper brushed past him. The corridor outside buzzed as the train guard conductor and a station inspector converged. Inspector Lestrade, summoned by telegram from Watson's pocket, entered the compartment briskly. Holmes greeted him. "No forced entry, and yet a murder has occurred." "Who had opportunity?" Lestrade blinked at the assembled clues. "Opportunity lies with every occupant of the coach, I fancy." He nodded at the steward, whose apron bore a single fresh smear of chalk dust. The steward's eyes flicked nervously from Holmes to his apron. "That's from cleaning the gangway," he protested. "We polished the carriage floors before departure." Holmes merely raised his brow, pocketing the fragment of chalk for later. Lestrade assembled the occupants in the adjoining lounge car. Lady Merriman, still clad in her coral beads, Mr. Giles Ford, hair uncombed and face sallow, Miss Clara Devine, whose gloves were white but for a faint brown smudge beneath the index finger, and Herr Klaus Bergmann, whose violin case lay closed at his feet. Each claimed ignorance of the crime until alarmed by Watson's announcement. Holmes observed them silently, noting in his notebook the slight tremor in Lady Merriman's left hand and the faint trace of cider on Ford's breath. He let several minutes of awkward silence pass before speaking. "I trust that should any witness recall unusual conduct or a momentary disturbance, they will inform Inspector Lestrade immediately." Afterward, Holmes and Watson returned to Sir Alistair's compartment for closer scrutiny. Holmes turned his attention to the desk blotter, inspecting the last lines scrawled feverishly. An indecipherable cipher, largely obliterated by a crimson smear. A letter of the alphabet preserved beneath each ink flourish, Holmes mused, but cut off at the edge of the page. His finger traced where the paper had been torn, revealing only the fragment platform. He pocketed the torn strip and replaced it with a clean sheet. Watson examined the curtains. "They are drawn closed, no doubt to shield him from the chill." Holmes peered at the fringe. One tassel was missing. And why missing? Perhaps a struggle at the window, though the latch remains locked. By the time the express resumed its journey, Holmes had reconstructed the likely sequence. An assailant entered C14 under cover of darkness, struck Sir Alistair swiftly with the dagger, then vanished as silently as a shadow. Yet he had left behind evidence too varied to dismiss: sandstone dust, chalk fragment, chipped ivory from the dagger, a torn cipher strip, and a missing tassel. Each item traced back to persons or places linked to Scotland's northern ports, clues that would guide Holmes's investigation once they reached Edinburgh. He pressed a hand to the carriage wall, listening to the muted rumble. "Watson," he said softly, "this journey has become far more than a scholarly excursion." Watson watched Holmes slide the dagger beneath his coat, careful to preserve its orientation. He approached the window, gazing out at the emerging dawn as the fields of Yorkshire drifted away. "Have you any notion, Holmes, of who might have committed so cruel an act?" Holmes joined him, exhaling a gentle cloud of smoke. "None yet that can be stated with confidence," he admitted. "But I would trust my deductions if I had reason to eliminate the innocent." He offered Watson a gloved hand. "Come, we shall confer privately. By the time we reach Edinburgh, our suspects will have narrowed themselves considerably." Watson gripped Holmes's hand, his mind racing with the implications of the morning's discovery. The express sped on through the waking countryside, its passengers unaware that a calculated murderer remained among them. And as the sun rose higher, its light would illuminate new evidence and darker motives yet to be uncovered. Chapter 3. A Carriage of Suspects. By mid-morning, the Edinburgh Express had settled into its steady cadence, the rhythmic clack of wheels lulling some passengers into a drowsy calm and others into restless anticipation. Holmes and Watson emerged from their private compartment, Holmes's Inverness cape brushing Watson's elbow as they stepped into the corridor. "We must confront our fellow travellers," Holmes remarked. "The lounge car will serve as an ideal stage." Watson nodded, tucking his notebook into his coat pocket. The lounge car was bright with daylight filtering through lace-curtained windows. Plush armchairs and round tables upholstered in burgundy velvet offered an air of genteel comfort. 4 passengers occupied the space, each absorbed in their own concerns. At a window table sat Lady Eleanor Merriman, her white hair coiled neatly beneath a small hat, her coral-tinted gloves resting in her lap. Nearby, Mr. Giles Ford, distinguished by sharp sideburns and a charcoal cravat, leafed through several sheets of typewritten manuscript. Miss Clara Devine hovered by the refreshment trolley, fingering a silver teapot with nervous precision. In the corner, Herr Klaus Bergmann cradled his violin case, his gaunt face half lit by sunlight, his eyes reflecting quiet tension. Holmes swept his gaze across the group before announcing, "Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for assembling at my request. I trust that you understand the gravity of recent events." His tone was courteous, yet firm. Sir Alistair Kestrel was found murdered in compartment C14 before York. I am now charged with uncovering the truth. I shall need your candid recollections of the night's occurrences, and of any anomalies you might have observed. Lady Merriman drew a steady breath. "I heard nothing after midnight, save the distant rumble of trains passing in the night. I retired to sleep soon after supper." She adjusted her gloves. "I woke early only when the crash of that poor man's tumbler roused me." Holmes made a discreet note of the neat creases in her gloves and the faint powder of rouge upon her wrist. "You mentioned in your conversation with the steward that you and Sir Alistair had exchanged words?" Holmes prompted. Lady Merriman flinched. "Only polite inquiries regarding the symposium. He had questioned me about travel arrangements, nothing more." Mr. Ford cleared his throat, folding his manuscripts. "I was drafting an article for the Chronicle. I heard a muffled thump around 1 o'clock, but I attributed it to the coupling of carriages. His cracked voice carried a note of defensiveness. "This train is rarely silent, you understand?" Holmes raised an eyebrow. "Indeed, but a blow struck with force would not be mistaken for iron wheels shifting on rails." Ford's gaze flickered. "I kept working until dawn. The noise did not recur." Miss Devine at last spoke. "I had little cause to leave my compartment. I have been travelling to Edinburgh to resume duties as governess for the Sinclair family." She smoothed her skirt nervously. "I observed only that the corridor seemed unusually brisk with activity, porter and steward moving crates and luggage after departure." Holmes inclined his head. "At St. Albans, the porter on duty fell ill and was replaced. Do you recall who you saw in his stead?" Devine hesitated. "I saw a younger lad, rather pale, but I did not think it my concern." Herr Bergman closed his violin case with a soft click. "I was in my compartment practicing," he said in clipped English. "I heard nothing amiss." His accent betrayed his German origin. Watson observed the violinist's hands trembling slightly as he set aside his case. "You travelled with that dagger in your case," Holmes said calmly. "It has since been recovered." Bergman's eyes widened. I keep an antique dagger for dramatic effect in a folk-inspired concerto." His voice cracked. "I assure you, I carried no ill intent." Holmes studied each passenger in turn. "Allow me to address a few particulars." He held up a scrap of notebook paper bearing the torn cipher. "Sir Alistair was deciphering a coded message when attacked. The fragment ends with "Butter platform. The significance of this will become clear." He placed the paper on the table. Watson leaned forward, but the suspects looked away, uneasy. Holmes continued. "Next, a crimson handkerchief was found lodged under the writing desk in C14. He displayed the small square of fabric. Lady Merriman's coral beads clattered as she gasped. Ford's hand twitched toward his waistcoat pocket. Devine's mouth parted in surprise. Bergman's pallor deepened. Lady Merriman regained composure first. "That cannot be mine," she insisted. "My maid launders all my linens." Ford lifted the handkerchief, examining it. "I have never seen such a pattern." He set it down. Miss Devine swallowed. "My gloves are unmarked," she said, nodding at her immaculate white leather. "I would recognize the slightest stain." Bergman stammered. "There are scarves of similar hue in Salzburg markets, but—" Holmes let the moment stretch before he pressed on. "Finally," he said, "the footprints at the scene bear a distinctive triple-groove sole. I observed the same design on Herr Bergman's boots." He pointed to the violinist's footwear. Bergman drew in a sharp breath. "Those are custom soles, yes," he admitted. "But the boots are new. I have worn them only to recitals." Holmes tapped his notebook. "Yet I find ochre dust on their heels. The rock specimens in Sir Alistair's luggage carried similar dust." Bergman's eyes darted to the door. I had occasion to cross to another coach after dinner," he confessed, "to tune my instrument where the light was better." Watson noted the violinist's shoulders slump, as if relieved the accusation was mutual. A hush settled. Holmes surveyed the tableau. Lady Merriman's trembling hand, Ford's rigid posture, Devine's darting eyes, Bergman's pale countenance. "Each of you has claimed innocence," Holmes observed, "yet each possessed opportunity. I ask you now, what motive might any of you harbour?" Lady Merriman cleared her throat. "My family name carries weight. Were Sir Alistair to expose my relatives' interests in contraband whiskey, our reputation would suffer." Ford leaned forward. "An exposé I am writing will reveal smuggling operations along the Scottish border. Sir Alistair promised me access to documents. He reneged." Miss Devine spoke softly. I had hoped to borrow Sir Alister's cipher notes to aid my own studies. He refused. Bergman's voice quavered. I sought a covert meeting with Sir Alister to commission geographical maps for an upcoming tour. He postponed our discussion. Lestrade, who had entered unobtrusively, cleared his throat. It seems all four stand to gain or lose by Sir Alister's demise. Holmes inclined his head. Indeed, but I shall not accuse indiscriminately. I require precise knowledge of the unscheduled platform stop at Dumfries. Who arranged it? The conductor swallowed. An anonymous telegram, sir. Instructions to halt for a private parcel exchange. Watson exchanged a glance with Holmes. A smuggling rendezvous, perhaps? He muttered. Holmes nodded. And likely orchestrated by our murderer to intercept Sir Alister's maps or cipher ledger. He turned back to the suspects. One of you dispatched that telegram knowing the train would stop, privately, then slipped away under cover of darkness to eliminate Sir Alister. You planted the handkerchief to implicate another, and you arranged for a different porter to service the carriage obscuring your identity. He regarded Lady Merriman. You know of such communications. To Ford, you have aptitude for clandestine messages. To Devine, your governess duties permit access to anachronous dispatches. And finally to Bergman, you travel under assumed schedules, slipping between carriages. The four exchanged glances unsettled. Holmes allowed a pregnant pause, then said softly, One among you panicked when events went awry. Soon each detail will fall into place. He stepped back. For now, return to your seats. The inspector may wish to question you further. The suspects dispersed, faces pale but composed. Watson followed Holmes out into the corridor. You must press them harder, Holmes, he murmured. They strain beneath your scrutiny. Holmes inhaled deeply, the compartment door closing behind them. Patience, Watson. Each suspect will reveal a crack in their facade, but only one will fracture completely. The train continued northward, its passengers unaware that the true culprit still journeyed among them, and that the net was tightening around a single guilty mind. Chapter 4. The Crimson Handkerchief. The train's measured clatter grew fainter as the staff prepared for the unscheduled halt at Dumfries. Holmes, seated across from Watson in their private compartment, frowned at the conductor's ledger when a sudden instinct stirred him to rise. Come, Watson, he said quietly. There is something in C14 that requires further inspection. The doctor should have been accustomed by now to these abrupt diversions, yet he nevertheless followed with mild surprise. Together they left their compartment and retraced their steps through the silent carriage. In C14, the morning light was steadier, brightening the polished wood and upholstery. Holmes's gloved hand brushed aside the compartment door's lower panelling, revealing a faint sepia stain. Blood residue, he murmured. Our victim was moved posthumously, but not far. He knelt, inspecting the floorboards with a pocket lens. There, wedged into the narrow groove beneath the writing desk, lay a fragment of silk, deep crimson, almost vermilion in tone. Holmes extracted it carefully. A handkerchief of superior quality, though worn at the edges, it was dropped, not left deliberately. Watson peered closely as Holmes unfolded the threadbare square. The deep hue suggested rich dye, perhaps from a gentleman's wardrobe rather than a lady's accessory. Yet the hem bore no monogram. Holmes flicked his finger along one corner. Notice these minute perforations. Under magnification, the holes formed a pattern too regular for moths. Likely needle punctures from a stiletto cleaning kit or a tailor's trial to adjust fit. Whoever owned this handkerchief took care of their garments. He folded it and placed it in an evidence envelope. We have identified one missing article. Now, to determine to whom it belonged. Holmes then turned to the windowsill. A splinter of cane wood caught his attention, the broken end of a gentleman's walking stick, its carved ivory handle gone. Watson, inspecting the fragment, noted a crest stamped in gold, the initials J.M. encircled by a wreath. Holmes pocketed it. Our suspect, or an accessory, perhaps borrowed from a gentleman of those initials. It struck Watson that neither Sir Alistair nor any present passenger bore that monogram. The initials could belong to a travelling companion or be another planted clue. Holmes's expression remained inscrutable. We must remain open to misdirection. Moving to the washstand, Holmes examined the ashtray. Within lay a solitary cigarette butt, its tobacco an unfamiliar blend, dark, aromatic, with a sharp bite. He tapped it upon his palm and scrutinized the paper band, which bore a foreign maker's emblem, a crowned lion rampant. Watson took out his notebook and jotted Belgian brand at Holmes's prompting. The victim smoked an English blend, Holmes remarked. This belongs to another, a companion with continental habits. He placed the butt alongside the handkerchief and cane in the envelope, sealing each piece in meticulous order. As the train began to stir, preparing to resume at Dumfries Station, Holmes straightened. Observe, Watson, how each clue emerges from the shadows when one knows where to look. He paused by the door, peering down the corridor. The steward passed, wiping his hands on a spotless cloth. Holmes inclined his head. The handkerchief belongs to none of the ladies, I warrant. Their gloves show no sign of crimson dye, nor do their reticules bear the slightest trace. The conductor halted by the door. Gentlemen, are you all right? Holmes offered a courteous nod. Perfectly, thank you. We merely required the benefit of fresh air. As the door closed, Holmes turned to Watson. Let us return to a public car. The confines of this coupe have served their purpose. Once settled in the lounge, Holmes spread the morning's discoveries before Lestrade. The crimson handkerchief, the cane fragment, the foreign cigarette, all told of at least 3 persons whose identities had yet to surface. Lady Merriman, Mr. Ford, Miss Devine, and Herr Bergman awaited them in the dining car, eyes wary and curious. Holmes regarded the inspector. Our quarry is both bold and meticulous. He or she left the handkerchief to draw our gaze here. But why risk dropping such an incriminating item? Lestrade tapped the glass table thoughtfully. Perhaps to shield the true artifact or to force us to overlook something more vital. Holmes allowed a half-smile. A sound hypothesis. Let us proceed with renewed attention to each suspect. At breakfast they found the 4 assembled at a round table. Holmes produced the handkerchief discreetly. Lady Merriman, he began, your gloves appear unstained, yet this handkerchief bears your preferred shade. May I ask if you parted with such an article last night? The coral bead-clutching widow's eyes widened. Never, Mr. Holmes. My maid takes such care of my linens. Holmes laid the cloth before Lady Merriman. This pattern of pinholes matches the work of London's finest milliner, yet no name. Curious, isn't it? She shivered. I have no knowledge of it. Holmes nodded once, inscrutable. Then, addressing Ford. And you, Mr. Ford, are you acquainted with Continental cigarettes? The journalist's lip curled. I smoke only British blends. That cigarillo was not mine. Holmes's gaze fell upon Miss Devine and Herr Bergman, in turn, eliciting similar denials. Yet Watson observed that Devine's glove finger was turned stiffly inward, as though to conceal something. And Bergman's polished boots wore the same 3-groove pattern as the footprints, but Holmes withheld comment. He rose. I believe that over the next hours, a certain individual will reveal a telltale reaction when confronted anew by these items. With that, he swept the room and withdrew. Watson followed, heart quickening in anticipation of the drama to unfold. Back in their compartment, Holmes laid out the pieces once more. Our killer set 3 traps for us, a handkerchief, a cane fragment, and a cigarette, but ventured too close to drop each intentionally. He or she wishes us to suspect Lady Merriman or the governess or the violinist, yet the truth lies beyond these decoys. He tapped the envelope. The genuine weapon remains undiscovered, concealed perhaps in an artifact of innocuous appearance. Watson studied his friend. Holmes's calm detachment never faltered, even now. "What is your plan, Holmes?" he asked. Holmes filled his pipe, lighting it at the burner. "We wait, Watson, for every criminal makes a mistake when they believe their ruse secure." Outside, the train hummed northward, bearing them closer to Edinburgh, and to the heart of a mystery woven of crimson dye and whispered lies. Chapter 5. A concealed cipher. The carriage lights flickered as the Edinburgh Express thundered on toward the Scottish border. Holmes and Watson had spent the better part of the afternoon in the private compartment, collating the morning's discoveries. By the time the train rolled into Carlisle just before dusk, Holmes's keen mind had sketched a preliminary outline of the crime, but many blanks remained. Watson stood on the platform, breathing the crisp air, while Holmes examined the official guard's logbook inside the booking office. "Notice this entry," Watson Holmes said, tapping a line in the ledger. "Our unscheduled stop at Dumfries was recorded under private instructions, no name given. And yet the train paused for 3 minutes longer than allotted." He traced a finger down the column of times. Sufficient to allow a parcel to be exchanged, but barely long enough for one man to alight, commit murder, and return unseen. Watson frowned at the scrawl. If only we knew who sent that instruction. Holmes closed the book. "We shall soon enough." Back aboard, the detective guided Watson through the dimly lit corridor. "We must revisit C14, he said. "A piece of information escaped our notice earlier." Watson followed, noticing how each passenger's footsteps hesitated when passing their compartment, as though fearful of Holmes's gaze. Inside C14, Holmes lit the small brass lamp. "Observe the hinges on this writing desk," he instructed. Watson inspected the mounting screws. Indeed, one hinge bore a solitary screw of a different gauge. Holmes removed it and pulled the desk away from the wall, revealing a narrow slot carved into the panelling. Watson's eyes widened. "A secret compartment," Holmes smiled faintly. "Precisely. Sir Alistair's meticulous habits would surely include the concealment of sensitive papers. Let us see what he hid away." He retrieved a slim leather pouch, fastened with a silk cord. Inside lay a folded sheet of onion skin paper covered in fine red script. Holmes brushed away a fleck of dust and smoothed the pages. "A cipher, Watson, a complete one, unlike the torn fragment we recovered." He unfolded the paper carefully and began to transcribe its contents. Watson watched as Holmes worked the cipher, his lips moving in silent calculation. Within moments, Holmes tapped his temple. A simple substitution scheme with an additional transposition. Sir Alistair's ingenuity shines here. The decoded text reads, "Meet at Carlisle Platform 1, 1915. Bring ledger. Trust no one but the courier. The map and cipher must change hands before midnight." "A midnight rendezvous at Carlisle," Watson murmured. "But the killer struck before that time." Holmes nodded. Sir Alistair carried this to secure the exchange of incriminating evidence, his ledger documenting smuggling routes and the cartel's participants. He flipped the page. Alas, the ledger itself vanished from this compartment. He pocketed the cipher sheet. "Our handkerchief decoy drew our attention, but the genuine document slipped away amidst the chaos. Watson's brow furrowed. We must retrieve that ledger to ascertain motive. Holmes replaced the pouch and closed the desk with precision. Indeed, yet our quarry would not linger here with such incriminating goods. The corridor offers another clue. He bent to inspect the upholstery beneath the desk, revealing a fine sprinkling of lavender powder. Lavender, Holmes noted, not from the victim's belongings, which bore only the scent of pipe tobacco. Someone with a penchant for delicate fragrances, a dresser or lady of refined tastes. Watson remembered Lady Merriman's ivory fan, scented to mask the chill. Could it be hers? Holmes shook his head. Her fan bore rosewater scent, not lavender. They retreated to the adjoining compartment. Holmes drew Watson aside. Our killer is both bold and precise. They arranged an anonymous stop, changed porters, concealed the ledger, and planted red herrings. Yet they overlooked the simple trace of lavender. He tapped Watson's arm. We have at least 3 persons travelling who might use such a powder, Miss Devine, Lady Merriman, and perhaps another disguised. Watson's eyes widened. What of Herr Bergman? His violin case exterior is laminated with rosin dust. Could he have used lavender to mask the rosin's pungency? Holmes considered. A sound hypothesis. We must test it. Their opportunity arrived at the station buffet at Carlisle. Holmes requested from the steward the perfume sachet used in the ladies' lavatory. The steward produced a small jar of rose-scented powder. Holmes lifted the lid and sniffed. Not the same, he declared. Then to Watson, fetch Miss Devine. The governess, hovering at the counter, approached. Holmes produced a glassine sachet containing the lavender powder lifted from C14. Miss Devine, might I trouble you to identify this fragrance? Her face paled as she recognized the powder. My own sachet, she stammered, retrieving a small lavender bag from her reticule. I carry it for headaches. Holmes nodded thoughtfully. Very well. And you were in and out of C14 last night delivering bottled water. The steward recalls your visits. She trembled. I brought him water, yes, but only at his request. I did not see... Holmes offered a sympathetic nod. You are no murderer, Miss Devine, but you aided and abetted movements in that corridor. Did you notice anyone else, perhaps in unusual haste? She bit her lip. There was someone in plain clothes carrying a violin case. They entered C14, paused, then left moments later. Watson's heart quickened. Bergman's guilt edged closer. Holmes guided Miss Devine aside. Rest assured, Miss Devine, that your cooperation will be noted. Watson escorted her away as Holmes approached Herr Bergman, who was paying for tea. Herr Bergman, Holmes began, you mentioned rehearsing in C12, yet your violin case bears traces of soot and coal dust. He turned the case's latch and revealed a subtle smudge of dark residue. This dust is not rosin, but from locomotive engines. You carried your case between carriages. Bergman's composure cracked. I needed fresher light in C14. Holmes produced the cipher sheet. Sir Alistair arranged meeting under cover of darkness, but you seized the ledger instead and dispatched it northward. When he resisted, you plunged your dagger. You then planted the handkerchief to implicate another. Bergman's shoulders slumped. Yes, but I did it for my daughter's education. The cartel's funds financed my tour. He closed his eyes. He would not bargain. Before Bergman could speak further, Lestrade entered with an urgent telegram. Inspector, this message just arrived. The parcel from Dumfries has been intercepted by customs at Lockerbie. They found nothing but geological samples. He handed the dispatch to Holmes. No ledger. Holmes frowned. Our culprit has concealed the ledger elsewhere. We must secure it before Edinburgh. He turned to Bergman. Come with me to the next compartment. If you cooperate, your motives will be taken into account." Bergman nodded numbly. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the platform lamps, Holmes and Watson led Bergman to C16. Holmes produced a master key and slipped inside. Beneath the cushions of a seat, he found a slim leather tome bound in dark green morocco. "The ledger," he whispered triumphantly. He handed it to Lestrade, who secured it in a sealed satchel. Watson exhaled. "Well done, Holmes." Holmes wrapped an arm around Bergman, who stared at the floor. "You will face justice, Bergman, but your honesty may mitigate your sentence." The violinist's voice quivered. "Thank you." Holmes stepped onto the platform as the train shuddered forward. Watson joined him, the bustle of departing passengers all around. "A tremendous night's work," Watson said softly. Holmes watched the disappearing carriages. "And yet, Watson, the true mastermind may still remain at large. This ledger reveals names, but the network behind it stretches beyond one instrument. Tomorrow in Edinburgh, we shall draw the net still tighter." Watson patted his friend's shoulder. "I have every confidence in your deduction." Holmes smiled faintly, eyes on the darkening rails. "Then let us rest. Tomorrow, the final pieces of the puzzle will fall into place." Chapter 6. At the Stafford Station. A sudden jolt, accompanied by a drawn-out squeal of steel wheels, roused Holmes and Watson from their compartment. The engineer's voice crackled over the carriage speaker. "Mechanical failure at Stafford. We shall be delayed until further notice." Holmes folded his hands calmly. "An unscheduled pause," he murmured, "affords us a valuable opportunity, Watson." Outside, passengers gathered in the vestibules, peering anxiously at the dark station platform. Holmes and Watson stepped out into the corridor, their footsteps echoing between closed doors. In the station master's office, a modest chamber lit by a single gas lamp, Holmes scrutinized the official guard's log and the minute-by-minute report of the breakdown. The station master, a rotund fellow with keen eyes, watched anxiously. Holmes pointed to an entry. "Porter change reported 22:17. Staff sergeant ill. Replaced by temporary lad." The station master nodded. "Aye, sir. Our porter took ill at Banbury. His nephew, a youth named Milton, filled in." Holmes made a note. "Milton, did he report any unusual requests or parcels?" The station master recalled. "He carried a small case from the London-bound coach to the goods yard, then hurried back. No one claimed it." Watson leaned forward. "A mysterious parcel, then?" Holmes's keen gaze did not waver. "Precisely. And yet our murderer required privacy to dispatch evidence northward." Holmes examined the ledger of carriage maintenance, then tapped a worn staple. "Here, the coach servicing crew recorded an additional check on C14's washstand the very morning of the murder, out of protocol." The station master appeared puzzled. "We're thorough folk at Stafford, but only if requested." Holmes's voice remained even. "Who requested the extra check?" The station master scratched his chin. "A telegram, sir, from an anonymous number, simply, 'Clean C14 thoroughly, return promptly.'" Watson exchanged a glance with Holmes. "Our killer again employing intermediaries." Holmes pocketed the logbook. "We shall need to find young Milton." Leaving the office, Holmes and Watson threaded through the station's dim recesses until they found Milton, the temporary porter, stacking crates of coal. Holmes approached, his manner calm, yet authoritative. "You carried a small case last night?" Milton started. I wasn't meant to mention it, sir." Holmes inclined his head. "But you did? Tell me, you delivered it to whom?" The youth swallowed. "No one took it, sir. I left it in the van, then the inspector there told me to forget it." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Which inspector?" Milton hesitated. "I don't recall the name. Tall fellow, moustache." Watson jotted this detail. "Sir Lestrade," he suggested. Milton brightened. "Aye, that's him, but he didn't open it." Holmes inclined his head. "And never will, until it serves his purpose. Thank you, Milton." As the youth scurried off, Holmes turned to Watson. "The parcel remains in customs custody, but it never reached Dumfries. Someone here thwarted its delivery." They reboarded the train, which steamed impatiently on the spur. Holmes beckoned Watson to follow him through the corridor. "We investigate each suspect's whereabouts at Stafford." He tapped on Lady Merriman's door and entered unannounced. The dowager sat primly, adjusting her coral beads. "Lady Merriman," Holmes began, "did you leave your compartment during the Stafford halt?" She smiled politely. "Not I, Mr. Holmes. I am no fan of unsettled platforms at dead of night." Holmes noted the absence of her walking cane, normally leaning by the door. "And yet your cabin's cane stand is empty." Lady Merriman's smile faltered. "I lent it to the porter to assist him with my luggage. I thought it harmless." Holmes nodded, a thoughtful gesture. "I shall return it anon." Next, they visited Mr. Ford's compartment. The journalist sprawled across the berth, writing feverishly in a notebook. "Ford," Holmes said quietly. "Stop scribbling." Ford looked up, ink-stained fingers trembling. "Holmes, Holmes held up a gloved hand. "At Stafford, you emerged in haste, carrying papers, bound in a green Morocco cover. Explain." Ford swallowed. "I collected them from Sir Alistair's compartment. They were loose on the desk." Watson recalled the missing ledger. "Did you inspect them?" Ford's face reddened. "Only to confirm they were schedules. I handed them to the porter for safekeeping." Holmes folded his arms. "And yet the ledger vanished. Note your haste, Ford." The journalist's pen clattered onto the floor. In Miss Devine's coupe, the governess poured tea with meticulous care. Holmes remarked on the silver tray's gleam. "Miss Devine, you visited C14 3 times at Banbury and once here at Stafford. For water, you said?" She nodded, eyes downcast. "He suffered a headache, Mr. Holmes." Holmes observed her teapot. The handle end bore lavender residue. "Your sachet's signature scent." Miss Devine paled. I carry it always, but I did not kill Sir Alistair." Holmes's tone remained even. "Then why did you accompany the porter to the goods van?" She bit her lip. "To identify a parcel addressed to me, sir. A private letter arrived for me before departure. I wished to collect it." Watson leafed through his notebook. "And did you?" Miss Devine's voice was barely above a whisper. "No parcel there, only sandstone dust and coal shavings." Holmes tucked that away. Finally, Holmes and Watson found Bergman in C12, polishing his fiddle's bridge. The violinist looked up, gloved hands stilling. Holmes placed the broken cane handle on the desk. "This belonged to Lady Merriman, yet bears the initials J.M. Bergman frowned. "Might that be Joan Meredith, a benefactor?" Holmes shook his head. "Our Lady's monogram is E.M., yet this accent matches the cane stand in your compartment as per station records." Bergman's face paled. "I borrowed it to steady myself when disembarking at Banbury." Holmes tapped the desk. "You did so, then retreated to C14 during the halt. Why?" Bergman's hands twitched. "I rehearsed a nocturne for performance. The rest of the train was too noisy." Holmes made no reply. As the express lurched forward, Holmes and Watson returned to their seats. Holmes lit his pipe. "We have confirmed each suspect's presence at Stafford, Lady Merriman lending her cane, Ford collecting papers. Devine seeking a letter, Bergman rehearsing by candlelight. Each had opportunity to remove evidence or conceal contents. Watson frowned. And yet, Holmes, we have no conclusive proof for any. Holmes exhaled a gentle plume of smoke. Patience, Watson. The messenger of chance will soon arrive. By late evening, a telegraph in the Edinburgh station master's office informed Holmes that the parcel intercepted at Lockerbie contained geological charts, not the ledger. Holmes mused that a second hoofprint lay hidden in these events. The killer orchestrated multiple misdirections. Dumfries stop, Lockerbie interception, Stafford parcel. Yet the ledger remained elusive. He tapped Watson's arm. Tomorrow, we visit the customs house. Therein lies the ledger's trail, and with it, the motive laid bare. Watson sank back, wearied but alert. Outside, the train's headlight carved a path through the gathering mist. Holmes closed his eyes, reconstructing every errand, every mislaid object, every whispered instruction. The Stafford station had offered a trove of half-truths, but Holmes knew that from fragments the whole portrait emerges, and at Edinburgh's customs house they would complete the frame. Chapter 7. The Last Link. The Edinburgh Express rattled through the gathering dusk as Holmes stood beside the now familiar writing desk in compartment C14. By Holmes's direction, Inspector Lestrade had summoned Lady Merriman, Mr. Ford, Miss Devine, and Herr Bergman to reconvene in the very scene of the crime. Watson observed the suspects' faces, each a mask of polite civility, yet beneath the veneer lay anxiety palpable in every furtive glance and measured breath. Holmes began without preamble. "Gentlemen, ladies, I thank you for your compliance. Tonight, I will demonstrate how each clue discovered thus far converges upon a single instrument of death." He gestured to the writing desk, its surface still faintly stained by whiskey and blood. "Allow me first to set the scene." Holmes carefully replaced the dagger he had recovered from Bergman's violin case, though until moments ago it remained hidden, upon the desk, blade upturned. The suspects gasped at the sudden reappearance of the weapon. Holmes's eyes swept over them. "This is the very dagger that felled Sir Alistair Kestrel, German steel of the finest Solingen quality, inlaid with ivory vine motifs now marred by that single chip." Lady Merriman's gloved hand fluttered to her throat. Ford's hand clenched the back of his chair. Devine's eyes widened, and Bergman's pallor deepened. Watson noted that each pair of shoes bore the distinctive three-groove sole, yet only one pair fitted the footprint pattern exactly, Bergman's. Holmes continued. "The blade's unique imperfections correspond precisely to Mr. Bergman's violin bow, wherein I discovered fragments of identical ivory inlay." He turned to the violinist. "Herr Bergman, you will demonstrate how this dagger came to rest within your case." Bergman swallowed, lips trembling. I maintain only rosin and strings therein." Holmes nodded to Lestrade, who produced a search warrant. Under the inspector's supervision, Bergman unlocked his instruments case and opened it before them. At first glance, the interior seemed unchanged, a velvet-lined chamber holding the violin, bow, and rosin tin. Holmes pointed to the tin. "The rosin box. Inspect its underside." Watson knelt and prized the tin free. The base, though appearing solid, concealed a neat hinge at one edge. With Holmes's assistance, Watson flipped open the false bottom to reveal the remaining half of the ivory vine handle attached to the dagger's hilt. Beneath lay a fragment of crimson silk pinned in place by a tailor's tack, matching precisely the silk thread recovered from C14. "You see," Holmes said, "the murderer concealed his weapon within the instrument case, trusting none would suspect a violinist of such intent. He removed the blade to strike, then returned it here until tonight." Bergman's face crumpled. I I confess. Lady Merriman approached me weeks ago with funds, promising me a handsome sum if I retrieved Sir Alistair's ledger. When he refused to relinquish it, she demanded more, and I despaired. He sank onto the seat, head in his hands. Watson offered a handkerchief, but Bergman sobbed quietly rather than accept comfort. Holmes lifted the dagger, inspecting the chip. Note how the ivory inlay here matches that on the cane fragment bearing the initials JM. He produced the cane handle, recovered earlier. Watson noted Lady Merriman stiffen. Holmes addressed her directly. Your initials, Lady Merriman, do not read JM, but EM. Yet this cane belonged to Joan Meredith, your estranged sister, who once lent you her initials on her own belongings. Lady Merriman's composure faltered. I sought to disguise my involvement. I feared suspicion would fall on me if I used my own cane. Holmes's tone remained calm. By planting a fragment of your sister's cane, you intended to implicate an innocent party, or to divert attention from your true role. Lady Merriman rose, voice quavering. I never ordered a man's death. I asked merely for the ledger, evidence that would ruin my family if published. Bergman acted beyond instructions. Holmes gestured to Lestrade. Inspector, I believe we have enough to charge Herr Bergman with murder and Lady Merriman with conspiracy to procure the commission of that crime. The inspector produced handcuffs as Bergman wiped tears from his eyes, murmuring apologies. Watson placed a steadying hand on Lady Merriman's shoulder. Her eyes brimmed with regret. Holmes turned back to the assembled party. This compartment, once the theatre of tragedy, now stands as testament to the power of observation and of motive. He extended the ivory-laden dagger toward Lestrade. Convey this to Edinburgh Castle for forensic comparison with the ivory fragments from the cane and the bow. Watson exhaled, feeling the tension lift as the final loop of suspicion closed around the violinist. As Lestrade led Bergman away, Holmes addressed Watson quietly. The final link was the dagger's concealment within the violin case, an ingenious ploy, but one requiring removal of the ivory inlay which betrayed the culprit. Watson nodded. And yet, Holmes, the broader network remains. Lady Merriman's manipulation of identities, the anonymous telegrams, the unscheduled stops. Holmes smiled thinly. All will be revealed in due course, Watson. But tonight we rest assured that the instrument of death and the hand that wielded it have been laid bare. Darkness descended upon the tracks outside as the express resumed its journey, carrying a train of secrets toward Edinburgh. In the stillness of the compartment, Holmes and Watson gathered the remaining clues, monogrammed cane handle, crimson silk, chalk fragments, for safekeeping. Watson lit Holmes's pipe, the tobacco's pale smoke curling like a triumphal banner. The detective reclined, eyes half closed, already contemplating the final act that would unveil the motive behind this cunning crime. Chapter 8. The Grand Resolution. Holmes's flat on Baker Street felt unusually hushed as he and Watson settled into their familiar chairs by the hearth. Noon sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, illuminating the rows of chemical vials and well-thumbed volumes that lined the walls. Lestrade sat stiffly on a settee, the morning's events still echoing in his thoughts. Between them lay the recovered ledger, its leather cover now slightly scuffed from customs examinations, and remnants of the violin case, handkerchief, cane handle, and cipher pages. Holmes tapped the ledger thoughtfully. Inspector, you will recall that Sir Alistair Kestrel's ledger detailed the cartel's network, routes, contacts, and payments. It implicated not only Lady Merriman's family interests, but also several high-ranking officials who facilitated smuggling along the border. When this ledger vanished, the conspiracy remained shrouded. Yet, thanks to Herr Bergman's confession, we have reclaimed the record. Holmes opened the ledger, flipping to a page where meticulous handwriting indicated shipments from Lockerbie to Leith. It was wise to seal it in customs, thus preserving the evidence. Lestrade nodded. An admirable bit of foresight. The council will be pleased. Holmes folded the ledger closed. Now to address Lady Merriman's culpability. Though she did not wield the dagger, her machinations set these events in motion. By dispatching anonymous telegrams arranging the Dumfries stop and sponsoring Herr Bergman, she believed she could secure her family's fortune without blood on her own hands. He paused. Such is the nature of moral compromise. One separates oneself from violence until it arrives unbidden. Watson leaned forward. And the ledger's fate? Holmes smiled. I have arranged for its controlled publication. Extracts will appear in tomorrow's Gazette, substantiated by Sir Alistair's cipher and my testimony. The smuggling ring will collapse under public scrutiny, and those officials complicit will face inquiry. He shrugged. True justice sometimes requires illumination rather than incarceration alone. Lestrade rose. I shall see Bergman and Lady Merriman processed at Bow Street. Bergman, as the direct perpetrator, will face trial for murder. Lady Merriman's charges will concern conspiracy and obstruction of justice. He bowed slightly and withdrew, leaving the two friends alone. Watson poured steaming tea from Holmes's silver pot. A neat conclusion, he remarked, though one regrets a talented musician drawn into criminality. Holmes inhaled the aroma of Darjeeling. Desperation can enlist the most unlikely accomplices, Watson. Herr Bergman believed he acted for noble ends, his daughter's education, but noble ends seldom justify base means. Watson sipped his tea. And Miss Devine? She provided water and unwitting aid to the corridor's movements. Holmes smiled thinly. Miss Devine's contrition was sincere. I interceded on her behalf. No charges will be laid. Her sole fault was misplaced trust in an acquaintance who manipulated her sense of duty. He retrieved the lavender sachet. I have returned this to her with an apology for the embarrassment. Watson set down his cup. And the other red herrings? The cane handle? The foreign cigarette? Holmes tapped the cane fragment. J.M. belonged to Joan Meredith, Lady Merriman's sister, whose identity was appropriated to mislead investigators. The Belgian cigarette, procured by Bergman to mask rosin dust, only served to entwine the violinist in suspicion, yet ironically confirmed his presence in C14. He paused, recalling how each clue had been woven into the killer's plan. Holmes stood and retrieved the ivory-handled dagger from its display stand. With delicate precision, he placed it back among his collection of curiosities. This blade, once concealed in a violin case, now returns to its proper place. Let it remind us that deception thrives where curiosity sleeps. Watson rose as well, stretching the morning's stiffness from his legs. Holmes joined him by the window, gazing out at Baker Street's bustle. My dear Watson, every case offers lessons. Today reminds us that ambition and fear can conspire to unleash violence, and that only steadfast logic can restore order. I anticipate public reaction to the Gazette extracts will be considerable. He allowed himself a rare moment of mirth. One hopes Sir Alistair's family finds solace in his posthumous vindication. Watson placed a supportive hand on his friend's shoulder. Your brilliance has given voice to the silent ledger and closure to the innocent. Holmes inclined his head in gratitude. Thank you, Watson. Your steady hand and faithful companionship remain indispensable. Let us adjourn for luncheon and perhaps a stroll in Regent's Park. The day's detective work is done, and though revelations remain ahead in court, our duties here conclude. As they departed the flat, Holmes paused on the threshold. Turning to Watson, he observed quietly, Remember, Watson, even the smallest fragment, a shard of ivory, a sliver of silk, can illuminate the darkest truth. And in the end, justice is but the sum of such fragments, assembled by patient scrutiny. Watson smiled, and together they descended the staircase, step by step, into London's bright afternoon, the echoes of the Edinburgh Express Enigma finally laid to rest.